Tell me again why the ops team needs a 50-year-old consultant with a Rolodex? That's how my Monday started. I was refilling the cheap Keurig by the hallway printer half-calf because apparently caffeine now disrupts Nick's flow state when I heard his voice slice through the hallway like a dull box cutter. Nick, the founder's new son-in-law, Harvard MBA, zero humility, and a jawline like a Pixar villain. I didn't flinch, just stirred the cup, walked past the glass-walled conference room, and met his eyes for half a second. He smirked. I didn't. I had a pitch deck to finish and an escrow clause to triple-check. Unlike Nick, I knew how many commas were in $150 million and exactly which ones could kill a deal. And still in that moment, I knew. The way a storm dog smells pressure before a tornado, the way an aging waitress knows a tipless table from the walk-in. My time was ticking. Let me back up. When I joined Caldera Systems, they were 3 guys in a coworking space using Post-its for HR compliance. The founder, Alan, brought me in as a contractor to clean things up for investors. 3 rounds later, we had offices, a legal team, and a valuation creeping toward 9 figures. I wasn't the visionary. I wasn't the face, but I was the map. I built the investor readiness framework. I negotiated the IP cleanup. I stitched together their first series of deck with a combination of sheer spite and Canva Premium. I helped Alan through a late-night panic attack before our first major pitch by quietly pulling out a printed copy of the entire MSA, tabbed and highlighted. He cried. I didn't tell anyone. So yeah, when Harvard Nick came sniffing around with his crypto speak and his growth mindset jargon, I already saw the writing on the whiteboard. Consultant became a dirty word. He started scheduling meetings without me, spinning up Slack channels I wasn't in. When Alan had a minor stroke and took a step back, Nick saw his chance, and I saw the countdown begin. But here's the thing no one tells these startup Ken dolls: power doesn't live in the pitch. It lives in the paper trail. See, Nick thought he was the main character, but I was the one holding the escrow clause, literally. I drafted it with the lead investors team. We spent 3 weeks on the wording. I'd even bought a new Moleskine notebook just to take notes on that call. Because yes, I am that consultant, the kind who knows when ink matters. Funny thing, 90% of you listening to this haven't subscribed. Maybe you just stumbled in for one story before bed, or you've been binging them like office candy. But if you're here, nodding along, whispering God, I know a Nick, then do me a solid. Tap that subscribe button and maybe throw us a like. It helps the team keep spilling these corporate confessions, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this one ends. Back to the hallway. Nick made another crack that day, loud enough for everyone near the WeWork glass to hear. You know what they say, old consultants never die, they just become process bottlenecks. I said nothing. Just went back to my desk, finished triple-checking the escrow binder, and emailed it to the lead VC's assistant with the subject line, Final Draft, Confidential Control Version. Then I printed a hard copy, tabbed, indexed, black binder. Because when they try to erase you, the trick is to leave the ink behind. The day Nick got promoted to Chief Operating Officer, a ficus plant died in the hallway. I know how that sounds, but I'm serious. That little guy had been thriving for years next to the copy machine, somehow alive despite fluorescent lighting and unpaid interns spilling Red Bull nearby. The day they moved Nick's nameplate outside Alan's office, the leaves turned gray and collapsed like wet paper. We all should have taken it as a sign. The announcement hit Slack at 6:17 a.m. Exciting changes in leadership. Let's welcome Nick Branson as our new COO as we prepare for Series B acceleration. No signature. No mention of Alan, who was still technically the CEO, just on a wellness sabbatical. I stared at the screen, sipping gas station coffee that tasted like betrayal. Nick, that smug overpromoted son-in-law who once asked me if consultants have a shelf life, was now in charge of operations. Mine included. I felt it in my spine. Not just the cold draft that came with new management, this was something more surgical. I could already see his strategy in motion: cut costs, trim headcount, package the company into something leaner for the Series B investor courtship. To someone like Nick, I wasn't a strategist. I was a line item. That morning, I backed up everything. Every clause I'd negotiated, every version of the MSA, the investor decks, the org charts, the SOPs. Hell, I even saved a screenshot of an old Zoom timestamp where Alan clearly said, Jessica controls the escrow process. I saved it all to 2 separate encrypted drives, one labeled contingency, the other insurance. And then I emailed myself a copy of the signed Series B binder contents with the subject line, if they bury me, dig here, because I'd seen this show before. You don't survive 3 acquisitions without learning how to read pre-firing weather patterns. The spontaneous calendar holds, the HR smiles that don't reach the eyes, the compliments that feel like funeral flowers. And lately, Nick had been complimenting me a lot. Jessica's institutional knowledge is irreplaceable. Jessica's got legacy insights will memorialize into the new system. She's like the company's conscience. A conscience, not a brain, not a partner. Just something to be thanked, eulogized, and tossed in a shared drive when the new kids took over. The week after his promotion, Nick rolled out Ops reimagination sessions, which is rich, considering his idea of operations was shouting synergy until someone else updated the spreadsheet. But there he was, in a pastel button-down, pacing in front of a whiteboard like a budget tech speaker, talking about shedding historical weight. I sat in the back of the room, arms crossed, watching him cross names off a list like he was selecting snacks for a flight. Lean teams, he said. Lean minds. Let's move forward with velocity. Velocity, my ass. He was getting ready to pitch to people who had no patience for risk. Investors love two things: clean structures and clear control. And I was the one holding the reins on both. But he didn't know that, not yet. In the meeting notes he shared, I noticed something chilling. He was shifting escrow control to finance, not legal, not investors, not even the founder. Finance, under him. Only the MSA didn't allow that. Clause 11.3 made that explicit. Escrow control was personally assigned to me, with a required 30-day notification and dual-party transfer clause. I remembered arguing for it. I remembered the call. The lawyer from Halworth Capital even said, "We've been burned before. Let's name someone we can trust." "Jessica, you good with that?" I said yes. I was good with that. So when I saw his little diagram with his name at the top and mine missing entirely, I smiled. A small, quiet, teeth-baring kind of smile. Because Nick didn't realize the bomb was already live. He was just walking closer with a match. I opened my notes, tapped out a new checklist titled Exit Prep, and underlined the first line. If I go, the money stays locked. The pitch was scheduled for 9 o'clock a.m. sharp, but by 8:17, Nick had already turned the boardroom into a startup-themed circus. Half the lights were dimmed for ambience. There were oat milk lattes sweating in compostable cups, and he'd piped in this ridiculous lo-fi playlist meant to signal we're chill but capable. I stood in the corner with my binder in one hand, clicker in the other, wearing the same navy blue blazer I wore during our series of Close Out. Not for luck, just because I knew what the hell I was doing and didn't need to perform it with a hoodie and buzzwords. The VCs trickled in one by one. First Halworth's senior partner, Linda Cho, deadpan as ever. Then two younger associates, probably tasked with watching for red flags. And finally, lead counsel from their side, a guy named Raj. Quiet, meticulous, and the kind of person who read footnotes before shaking hands. Alan, the founder, was still out recovering from surgery. His seat at the table was empty, symbolic, and also fatal. Nick stood at the head, sleeves rolled, chin up, acting like he'd personally built Caldera from scratch instead of marrying into it. "Thanks for joining us," he said, like he was addressing a group of interns. "We're excited to share Caldera's next phase of hypergrowth." He tossed me a smile that had all the sincerity of a phishing email. "Jessica, why don't you start us off with the ops overview?" I nodded, connected my laptop, and clicked to the first slide. Caldera's operational velocity has outpaced initial series of projections by 36%, and the Phase Roman 2 scaling roadmap, actually. Nick cut in, waving his hand like he was hushing a waiter. "We're going to pivot a bit here." I blinked. "Pivot?" "While we appreciate Jessica's long-standing contributions," he said, stressing the word like he was euthanizing a pet, "we've decided to streamline moving forward. Effective today, she's stepping away from the company." Dead silence. My heart didn't drop, it froze. He had done it, in the room, in front of investors, like I was a malfunctioning projector or an outdated printer that needed recycling. No warning, no one-on-one, no exit interview, just effective today. I turned to face him fully, saw the slight clench in his jaw the way his fingers drummed once then stopped. He expected a scene, maybe even hoped for one, but I wasn't going to give him the theater. I just smiled. A tight, silent thing, walked to the table, set the black binder down next to the investor packet, and I left. No words, no drama. Just the faint sound of my heels against engineered hardwood as I walked out of the room I had practically built brick by operational brick. Behind me I heard murmurs. Then a voice, Raj, the VC's lawyer. "Wait, wasn't that the Series B escrow release binder?" Pause. Nick's voice, forced casual. "Oh, we've got digital backups. Everything's under control." Raj again. "Who signed the original?" "The MSA specifies it has to be the named controller." I didn't stop walking. I didn't need to. The echo of Raj's question was already peeling paint off the walls. Because inside that black binder was the only clean, investor-approved release form with the required tabs, signatures, and escrow instructions, authored, finalized, and locked under my name. The binder wasn't a prop. It was the key, and Nick had just tossed the locksmith. I stepped into the elevator, pulled out my phone, and sent a one-line text to my lawyer. They pulled the trigger. Time to let the clause speak. Then I smiled again, for real this time, because humiliation is only the beginning. And steel waits. Inside the boardroom, I imagine Nick tried to pivot the moment into a disruption win. That's his specialty: take a disaster, wrap it in PowerPoint, and call it innovation. But this wasn't a slide deck error. This was blood on the carpet. Less than 20 minutes after I walked out, the first email hit my inbox. Not from Nick, not even from legal. It was a finance analyst, nervous and vague. "Hey Jessica, just wondering if you could confirm which version of the Series B escrow release you submitted to Raj's team. There seems to be some confusion." Confusion, that was one way to put it. By noon, they weren't just confused. They were in scramble mode. Nick called an emergency sync with legal, finance, and ops, dragging in anyone who'd ever clicked on a DocuSign. He tried to play it cool, claiming contingency redundancies were already in motion. But here's the thing about legal frameworks. You can't charisma your way through them. The CFO, Marta, one of the last adults in the building, spoke up halfway through the call. Just to be clear, she said, voice calm but laced with caffeine and dread. Clause 11.3 of the MSA explicitly names Jessica Lattimore as the controlling escrow officer for Series B disbursement. There's no alternate signatory. The clause requires 30 days' notice and her written approval to transfer authority. Silence, followed by Nick's trademark, will loop in legal to massage the language. Marta didn't blink. We are legal, and it's binding. In the background, someone audibly choked on a sip of La Croix. At 1:00 p.m., Halworth Capital had issued a formal hold on the wire transfer. Their lead counsel, Raj, sent a courteous but chilling message to our executive distribution list. Pending clarification of escrow release protocol and assurance that controlling signatory authority is in accordance with Clause 11.3 of the executed MSA, we are placing a temporary freeze on all Series B fund movement. This is standard due diligence. Translation, you tried to play games with the vault. Now you can't even see the door. Meanwhile, I was at a quiet Italian place on 11th Street, sipping Pinot Grigio and splitting a grilled artichoke with Naomi Torres, a former COO I'd helped out 2 years ago during her acquisition mess. You're calm, she said, folding her napkin into a triangle like she always did when sensing blood in the water. I shrugged. They fired me in front of the investors, called me redundant. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You? I nodded. She sipped her wine. So how long till they realize you were the one holding the kill switch? They're realizing it right now. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from someone high up in legal, an urgent clarification request with 3 attachments and a subject line that just said, "Need insight escrow chain." I didn't open it. Instead, I slid my phone face down on the white tablecloth and leaned back. Because while they were combing through Slack threads and Dropbox folders trying to find a magic override button, I already knew there wasn't one. I had negotiated the clause myself, word by word. Alan and I had sat in a glass office at 9:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, arguing over the phrasing of named controller vs. authorized signatory. I'd insisted on my name being tied to the escrow controls, not my title, because titles can be reassigned. Aims not so much. And now the company was learning that lesson the hard way. Want dessert? Naomi asked. I smiled. I think they're already eating crow. We ordered tiramisu. I paid in cash. The restaurant was warm. The kind of warm you feel after surviving a blizzard. And outside, on the other end of town, Nick was standing knee-deep in the ice storm he created, still pretending the weather was just a breeze. By Wednesday morning, the panic had evolved into something quieter. Not better, just more desperate. The all-staff buzz was gone, replaced by whispers in side chats and locked meeting rooms with hastily printed agendas. Nick had stopped peacocking through the halls with his AirPods and disruption swagger. Now he was walking fast, eyes low, voice clipped, because every lever he tried to pull kept snapping off in his hand. He'd called a reassignment through finance. Denied. Tried to authorize legal to file a substitution form. Denied. Even reached out to Halworth directly, hinting at temporary emergency signatory privilege. That earned him a politely worded hell no. And the reason? Clause 11.3. 6 little lines buried deep in the Master Services Agreement, wrapped in enough legalese to make an MBA's eyes glaze over. But I remember every word. I helped write them. In the event of any intended transfer of escrow control, written 30-day notice must be submitted to the investor group, co-signed by both the outgoing named controller and the successor controller, pending investor review and approval. It didn't say COO. It didn't say authorized personnel. It said Jessica K. Lattimore. They'd built a skyscraper on top of a single steel beam, then ripped out the beam live on Zoom. At 10:12 a.m., the company calendar quietly updated with a new title, Series B Emergency Compliance Review Exec Only. No invite for me, obviously, but the subject line alone reeked of sweat and liability. I imagined the scene as I sipped coffee from my porch. Nick, posturing at the head of the table, saying words like adaptable, nimble, low-friction pivot. Marta, the CFO, glaring into her cup, knowing damn well this was the financial equivalent of setting the server room on fire and asking where the password was. Legal flipping through printed versions of the MSA, highlighting 11.3 in 4 different colors, hoping that maybe, magically, they'd find a loophole. Spoiler alert, they wouldn't. I got a text from an old colleague who was still in ops. Just one line, he's trying to pitch that your email signature counts as co-signature. I laughed so hard I nearly snorted espresso. Then I pulled up my old files, found a folder labeled redundancy planning in case of idiots, and smiled. Every doc, every clause, every version, time-stamped, digitally backed. I'd spent a decade watching companies implode because they assumed loyalty meant silence and structure could be bent around ego. So when I drafted my consulting scope with Alan, I made sure one thing was immutable: control of the funds. If they wanted me gone, fine, but the money would stay parked until the adults came back to the table. Naomi called just as I was finishing my toast. Are you watching this? She asked, already half laughing. I can picture it. They brought in outside counsel, some guy with a beard and a panic folder. He read clause 11.3 twice and just said, yeah, you're screwed. Nick's still pretending he has a plan. Worse, he's blaming you, saying you intentionally obfuscated succession protocols. I rolled my eyes. It's not obfuscation, it's binding, there's a difference. You think they'll beg you to come back? Beg? No. Invite? Yes, because here's the thing, I didn't want revenge, I wanted distance. But I also wasn't about to let a glorified spreadsheet salesman erase me and still collect a $150 million payday, so I watched, quietly, while the investors paused, while the board split. While Nick tried to steer a ship he'd already set on fire. And somewhere in the middle of that emergency meeting, when the third lawyer shook his head and said the clause couldn't be bypassed without my sign-off, I bet someone finally muttered the thing they'd all been avoiding. We have to bring Jessica back. Too late. I wasn't coming back. Not to that table, not to those terms. Next time, it'd be my name on the table, not just on the clause. The leak started with a typo. One of the junior analysts, poor guy, fresh out of Wharton, still using Synergy unironically, forwarded a redlined version of the MSA to the wrong thread. Meant to send it to internal counsel. Instead, he blasted it to the entire Halworth investor subgroup. Every partner, every associate, every lawyer. Attached? Clause 11.3 in bright red with the subject line, urgent escrow signatory missing. They tried to recall it. But this isn't a birthday evite. You can't unsend panic. By lunchtime, whispers had become group calls. By 2:00 p.m., those calls turned into back-channel inquiries. Senior partners asking things like, was this truly an authorized termination? And what is the chain of control post-dismissal? The board tried to spin it. Jessica was a consultant, standard transition. She was never involved in the financial mechanics. We've got it handled internally. But investors aren't fools, especially not the kind writing 8-figure checks. The illusion cracked, then it crumbled. The founder, Alan, still recovering from his health scare, hadn't weighed in. His absence left a vacuum, and Nick rushed to fill it with self-assured nonsense. He posted a tone-deaf Slack message to the #executive leadership channel. Remember, obstacles are just opportunities in disguise. Let's keep this momentum going. Momentum? You locked the vault and fired the only person holding the key. By late afternoon, the mood at Caldera HQ had curdled into something bitter. Staff started tiptoeing. Calendars went private. Slack emojis vanished. No one wanted to be seen laughing, liking, or lurking. They could smell it, the slow-roasting failure. Nick, cornered by his own reflection, tried to slip me a message through a third party. The messenger, Tyler Nguyen, a junior analyst who once asked me how to spell comptroller. Sweet kid, still had hope in his eyes. Emailed me with a subject line so carefully neutral it screamed desperation. Quick clarification on process flow, kindly review inside, a single paragraph. Hi Jessica, hope all is well. Nick was wondering if you'd be open to a quick alignment call regarding the escrow release process. Informal, of course, no pressure. Just looking to clarify a few steps for transparency and continuity. Translation, please come back and fix what we shattered. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because silence is louder than fury when you've already won the argument. Instead, I forwarded the message to my attorney with a single note: do not engage. Let them sweat. Because by now, the heat wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the top-down investor firestorm Nick had invited by trying to bulldoze legacy for optics. Meanwhile, I was sitting across from a partner at Beacon River Capital, a rival firm that had tried to poach Caldera's account last year. We were at a rooftop bar downtown, breeze in our hair, white wine sweating in stemless glasses. He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to sound like an invitation. So, how interested are you in building something new? I didn't answer, not directly. Just raised my glass and let him draw his own conclusions, because that's the difference between being fired and being freed. When they kick you out, you think it's exile, but when you walk out holding the only working key, that's escape. Let Nick fumble through rewrites. Let the board hold frantic alignment calls at 9 p.m. with nobody willing to be the first to say his name. I wasn't coming back to rescue them. I was already halfway into building what would replace them. And the best part, they didn't even know who'd sent the first whisper to the investors. Some things are best left unconfirmed. By Friday morning, couldn't hide it anymore. The walls were bleeding stress. Executive calendars showed blocks marked personal time and urgent regroup. Meeting invites started getting declined with responses like awaiting legal clarity. Even the receptionist had stopped pretending to smile. Word had spread. The Series B was frozen. Not delayed, not restructured. Frozen, and the board had questions. The kind of questions that don't start with how or why, but with who the hell let this happen. They convened an emergency session, virtual of course, because no one wanted to be physically in the blast radius. Cameras on, mics hot, reputations dangling. Half the board leaned hard into spin. Jessica should have documented her exit procedures more clearly. This could be seen as intentional sabotage. Is there a version of the release binder that wasn't hand-carried out of the pitch room, but the other half? Ones who actually read contracts before rubber stamping them? They weren't having it. She didn't sabotage the raise, Marta, the CFO, snapped. She secured it. The clause is airtight. One senior investor, Reuben Klein, old school, big money, notorious for blowing up founders with a single line, leaned forward on the call and dropped a sentence that rang through every pair of AirPods like a detonation. If she doesn't return to confirm release, I pull my capital. Silence. Nick adjusted his collar, tried to stay cool. With all due respect, Reuben, Jessica was never an employee. She was a contractor, a support figure. This shouldn't fall apart because of a misclassified vendor, a beat. Then Alan's personal attorney, quiet, gray-haired, always 2 steps behind the camera, unmuted, removed his glasses and said flatly, "She was the named controller. It's in writing." He held up a printed copy of the MSA, turned it toward his webcam like it was a holy text. Page 47. Clause 11.3. Escrow release authority is vested in the named controller, Jessica K. Lattimore, whose signatory status is non-transferable without 30 days' notice and co-signature approval. He set the document down. Nick tried to bluster again, something about modernizing outdated controls. But it was too late. The magic trick had failed. The silence in that Zoom call wasn't just awkward, it was surgical. Everyone in that digital Brady Bunch square grid could feel it. The weight of a $150 million failure, authored in real time by a man who thought charisma could replace compliance. No one spoke for several long seconds. Then Reuben leaned back and exhaled through his nose like a disappointed father. Bring her back. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Meanwhile, I was at home, sitting on my porch, dog asleep by my feet, laptop closed, watching storm clouds roll over the trees and sipping tea like I hadn't just become the most powerful person in a collapsing empire. My inbox was a graveyard of checking in emails. My voicemail, full of sudden apologies. One board member even sent a $200 bottle of wine with a post-it that read, "Hope we can talk soon." You're critical. I didn't open it because I wasn't angry. I wasn't even smug. I was still. When you've been erased, gaslit, fired, and framed, when your competence is treated like clutter, your legacy turned into someone else's PowerPoint, you don't need to shout when the tables turn. You just wait, and they'll do the shouting for you. The invitation came by courier, not email, not Slack. Not a desperate phone call from someone pretending it was all just a miscommunication. A leather envelope, embossed, thick paper, formal, overcompensating. Inside, a request for a private reconciliation discussion with Caldera's board to resolve the outstanding compliance obstacle related to the Series B release. I smiled, folded the letter, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and called my lawyer. "I assume you're not walking in solo," she said, already opening her calendar. "Oh, I'll be walking in," I replied, "but not alone." We arrived Monday morning. No fanfare, no security badges, just the click of our shoes against the polished concrete as we made our way to conference room Omega, the one they always reserved for things too sensitive to admit were emergencies. Nick was already seated at the far end of the table. Eyes sunken, tie abandoned, typing furiously into his phone until he realized I was in the doorway. He stood up fast, too fast, like a kid caught shoplifting. Marta gave me a small, respectful nod. Alan's attorney gave me a faint smile, eyes flicking briefly to the thin blue folder in my hand. They expected a negotiation. They got terms. I sat down slowly, opened the folder, and slid one document forward. A consulting agreement. Clean, clear, bulletproof. Retainer 6 figures up front. Title, Escrow Resolution Consultant. Term, 90 days, renewable at my discretion. Scope, sole authority to confirm Series B release. Clause, no involvement in company operations or internal politics. And most important of all, Nick Branson to be removed from all operational control functions, effective immediately upon execution. No fireworks, no threats, just paperwork. The board read in silence. Reuben, the investor with the most skin in the game, tapped the paper once, looked at Nick, then at me. "This is fair." Alan's lawyer didn't even speak, just signed. Marta followed. 2 more board members added their names. When the folder returned to me, the room was still quiet, except for Nick. He leaned forward, voice low and laced with last-ditch arrogance. "You know this isn't sustainable, right? You can't just, Nick." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You fired me in front of investors. You implied I was irrelevant. You attempted to override a binding clause with a LinkedIn post and a spreadsheet. And when it all went sideways, you used a junior analyst as a human olive branch." He opened his mouth again. I cut him off. "You're lucky I didn't send this through litigation. Now sit down, quietly, and let the grown-ups clean up your mess." He sat. The last signature dried. My lawyer closed the folder. "Congratulations," I said, standing. "You've been operationally neutered by the same redundant contractor you tried to erase." The room didn't cheer, they didn't clap, but I felt the weight shift. In that moment, I wasn't just returning, I was installing myself. Not as a fix, as a firewall. As I left, I passed Tyler, the analyst who'd sent me that careful email, and gave him a nod. "Good instincts," I said. He blinked like someone had just knighted him with a stapler. Back in the elevator, I didn't exhale until the doors closed. Not from nerves, from restraint, because I didn't go back to reclaim a title. I went back to define one, on my terms. With my pen and my claws, Nick never saw it coming, but he damn sure signed off on it. They'd rearranged the boardroom since the disaster pitch. New chairs, different table. A bigger monitor on the wall like tech could disinfect shame. But the air still carried it, failure freshly Febrezed. The full board was present, investors dialed in, cameras on, posture tight. No one was scrolling, no one was checking watches. This wasn't a meeting, this was a reckoning. And I walked in holding the same black binder I'd set down the moment they fired me. Nick didn't look up. He was seated off-center now, no longer at the head of the table, no laptop, no notepad, no power. Just him and a recycled cup of tea he hadn't touched. His jaw was tight like he still hadn't figured out how all of this had slipped through his perfect little fingers. The founder, Alan, was back, thinner, paler, quiet. He said nothing as I entered, but his eyes followed the binder like it was a ghost. I placed it on the table, not with flair, just intention. Raj, the lead VC's lawyer, leaned in, unfastened the flap, and began flipping through it. He didn't need to read it, he'd reviewed it twice already, but he knew the ritual mattered. Page 82. Clause 11.3. He cleared his throat, voice even. Escrow release contingent on named controller sign-off, Jessica K. Lattimore. Silence. I reached into the folder and slid forward a single page. Signed, dated, confirming release. The investors didn't cheer. Raj just nodded once, sharp and final. It's approved. Somewhere across the Zoom call, someone exhaled. Ruben, the investor who'd threatened to pull out, smiled for the first time in a week. Thank you, Jessica. I didn't respond. I looked toward Alan. He looked older now, but not weak. Just tired. His fingers were steepled in front of his lips. Nick didn't move. He just stared at the binder like it had betrayed him. Like he still didn't quite believe it had teeth. That a contractor, could have sunk him with paper. And I remembered his words crystal clear. Grandpa doesn't need old consultants, so I spoke. Calm, cold, controlled. You said Grandpa didn't need consultants. I picked up the binder and held it in one hand, light as a trophy. Turns out, Grandpa wrote the clause with me. And then I walked out. No handshake. No eye contact. No need to linger. As I stepped into the hall, I glanced back once. The screen on the wall was now showing the Zoom welcome screen. Bottom right corner, small but sharp, my firm's new logo, Lattimore Strategies, not just back. Built. The door closed behind me. Let the rest of them fight over the scraps. Let Nick explain how he got legally checkmated by someone he thought was obsolete, me. I was already on my way to the next pitch. Binder in hand. And this time, it had my name embossed in gold. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.